All right. Hey, welcome in, everybody. Last week, Sunir and I were standing in front of the sign in Fort Mason in San Francisco for Microsoft Build 2026. Over the 2 days, I think there were 25 or 30 different announcements. There was a concert and a whole bunch of other exciting things. One thing that I thought was really interesting about Microsoft Build this year, and I've done this best to build for 5 or 6 years now, is that I've always been able to go back to the book of news, and they completely abandoned the book of news this year. I was telling poor Sunir here, like, hey, when the keynote launches, book of news is going to drop. We're going to go in. And I'm like, what is this? There's like this CLI thing that like can't use as my cheat sheet. I actually have to pay attention and listen to the keynote. So we sat through the keynote, took a bunch of pictures, and then spent 2 days talking with the product teams. And this is our opportunity to filter out what was noise, what the good signals were, what the bad signals are, and what kind of piqued our interest. Sunir, introduce yourself real quick. We have a jam-packed amount of like things to go through today, so we're going to go fast and furious, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Hey, everyone. I'm Sunir. I work as a lead architect for concurrency and looking forward to talking through the best of builds with you guys.
All right. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of a confession. Walking into Build, I had posted a newsletter post, on my blog on LinkedIn with my predictions of things. And as I was getting on the plane to San Francisco, NVIDIA announced their RTX Spark. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I had this thesis. One of the things that was going to be talked about is that Microsoft was building itself out to be the marketplace for AI and not necessarily a competitor. And boy, was I wrong on that one. I just want to admit it. The Microsoft AI models that came out demonstrated they're willing to lean in to be that competitor. And there's a lot of good reasons about it. But I think if I take a step back, I wasn't really completely off base with this. We saw this theme of like the control plane really starting to take shape. We've been using this terminology now for about a year, but I saw this start to take shape this year. And so we'll see what that actually means. Hopefully we'll get a good understanding of it in the webinar. Anything that like you got wrong walking into it, Sunir?
Well, I went with an open mind and this was my first build. So, I was like, everything was information from a fire hose to me. So I didn't have any pre-concepts, as I was walking into the session. So,
yeah. So let me go ahead and just kind of give you a quick agenda of what we're going to do here today. We're going to walk through some of our initial impressions. And then, we're going to just basically walk through security and governance, tooling, agent runtime, compute fabric. I know that Sunir's got a lot of content. I took a lot of good pictures, but high level, this is how we're going to walk through things. And before we get started, I do want to say that like agents don't have like just app shaped traffic anymore, right? We have a different call pattern that is starting to bring in a lot of different data. Anything you want to talk about real quick?
Yeah, I mean, these agents, they loop, store, retrieve, reason, act, and learn, right? So different call patterns mean different databases, or different warehouse, different context services. That single fact explains every data announcement at the build, right? Like hold that thought and we'll cash in on that in the next 15 minutes, I guess. So.
All right. So before we get into the deep dives, I think it's really, we're not going to get through every one of the announcements. I think it's really interesting just to take your top 5. Why don't you go first, Sunir? What really resonated with you coming out of Build?
Oh, the first one, my favorite was Microsoft IQ, right? So context became a product surface you can point agents at, right? And then we'll talk more about it. 2 was HorizonDB. It's a Postgres service rebuilt for agents. So it's transactional plus vector plus search in one engine. And 3rd was card speed, as they call it, right? So it's a fabric warehouse powered with NVIDIA GPUs, right? So you're never going to have the dearth of compute power in fabric anymore. And then other thing that I really didn't expect was like Power BI in Agentic era, describing a report and seeing a semantic model being built and a Power BI dashboard being built was awesome to see, right? And Cosmos DBs, some of the Cosmos DBs with native AI functionalities was also one of the things that I really liked. These are my top 5.
I remember that demo with the Power BI. That was really cool. And I was surprised too. It's the data platform is one of those areas where it's got some cool AI features to it, but from a development standpoint, it seemed to be kind of lagging. And maybe we're going to see a little bit of momentum. And I know you got quite a few slides on that concept. So I'll take over. I'll go with my top 5. I would say like Foundry's operating layer, actually going GA. I've been doing a lot of talking about tracing and evals and, having just one open telemetry pipeline. And, so it actually started to see this start to take shape. ACS and assert, there's like now open deterministic trust stack for agents. I think it got the least amount of coverage, but maybe deserves quite a bit more. Agent 365 was an interesting story kind of coming into it. Beginning of the month was when we first started to be able to use it. But now we're starting to use, watch that through MXC and like how we can actually deploy some of these agents in a safer container. Copilot Studio agents coming under the Foundry control plane. Again, something that wasn't really talked about. I had to really get into the product teams to layer into what that actually means. I've got a little bit of a hallway conversation. I'm not sure if I want to do it on a recorded line, but some interesting things that are coming through. And then, actually being able to see the agent framework in GA and what that actually means for organizations, how they're going to start using it. This is, I would be remiss if I didn't kind of lay into it. Not something that got a lot of keynote attention, but definitely walking the floor, talking to the product teams. They were leaning into this real heavy. Those are the 10 picks that we've got between the two of us. But I think if we kind of break this down into 3 major themes, takeaways that I had. The first one, I would say, Sneer, you put the HorizonDB as your number, what was that, number 2?
I guess, yeah.
I had it as kind of a footnote, and we were talking to the group at the same time. Make your case.
Yeah, so it's an agentic app data tier, right? So it's durable state plus vector plus search, all collapsing into one, right? So on the front face of it, you are actually getting your native Postgres, right? Which is open source, and you get all of those functionalities plus all of the shared storage architecture for resiliency, for DR, and extremely capable storage functionalities with Postgres being on the front. So it's going to be definitely needed in the AI era, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just feel like for me, it was there's tools out there that did it, a lot of what they do, and it underwhelmed me a little bit. But I think there's an important story with Postgres coming through, and having that native boundary is, I think, going to be kind of important. We also got this context, became the infrastructure, and we're going to really look into the IQ layers that surfaced through the keynotes. And then these agents, kind of got identity and initiative. Any other thoughts, from your perspective, Sunir?
Yeah, for you, ACS and assert weren't even in my notes. So why is it number 2 for you?
All right. So ACS is the agent control specification. And this again, comes with, comes a little bit more, less from the keynotes and more from the hallway chatter. And it, for me, it's I've been talking so much about the enterprise adoption of these agents and then having the control patterns that go along with it, not just Agent 365, but really being able to control these agents and the life cycles as well. And I think it's super important, something that's been resonating with the conferences that I've been going to this year and the people that I've been speaking about. But hey, everybody's going to have their opinions. That's why we bring a couple people, to build is to take a look at different things. I do want to just be a little bit honest about what we're not going to talk about today. And there's some really, really cool stuff on this slide. Every one of these is real. And in fact, actually, if you just look at the raw community, who's talking about what, the GitHub Copilot app, that was probably the biggest, people are still talking about it, trying to figure out what that means. The Copilot booths were just jam-packed all the entire time. If we do a part 2 of this, I think that would get a really significant amount of attention. But hey, I can only go through so much, and I know we're going to run out of time. These are the things that I think in like 15 seconds or less that I'll go ahead and talk about. So the GitHub Copilot app, having like this native, really easy to use, built for developers, development desktop experience. There were things like concentration mode and all that. Fantastic. All this stuff is great. The Windows dev experience, working native with like WSL containers, also fantastic. This Microsoft Discovery, the R&D platform, man, they've been talking about this at every build for the last 2 or 3 years, and it's been really fantastic to see. It's going GA, but man, I've seen it on the keynote like 3 years in a row. It just doesn't excite me anymore. The NVIDIA Unified Stack, Majorana, I've never figured out how to pronounce Majorana.
Yeah.
You keep asking about this, why and what, and we're not going to talk about it, but you feel strongly about it. So I'll give you 15 seconds to make your case.
Well, like quantum computing is the future. So I believe like Majorana is worth the talk. I've been trying to read a little bit about quantum computing and why, what are we going to get with long retention of information that quantum computing would have. With Majorana too, I think, retention of information in these chips are averaging to almost like 20 seconds, which will exponentially improve the probability of new inventions and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that Majorana too. And they're saying they can go production in 2029. So that's exciting.
That's a long time away, man. It's an exciting announcement. I think it's fantastic news, and it's really going to change the compute paradigms that we actually use. But it's so far out in the future, man. I just don't. That's kind of why I put it on the list. All right, so let's talk a little bit about theme one. So the control plane, right? I would say like the sharpest criticism that's been floating around the developer forums after build, would come down to like the sentence: this governance layer is nowhere near the capability layer. So that gap is what enterprises, I think, are like trying to reconcile with right now. So we're going to look a little bit into what Microsoft did this year to close that gap. I would say that one thing that sticks out to me is that it no longer matters where your agent was born, whether it was in Copilot Studio, whether it's, something that you developed in Pro Code, maybe even like Google or AWS. Microsoft has the management plane that is going to help you pull all of this together. Founders tracing evaluations. I've done a talk about this. One of my coworkers, Mac, and I went down to Chicago and kind of demonstrated this out inside of Foundry. It's fantastic. It's got one, OTel pipeline. You've got evals linked back to the exact traces and how you can produce them. This is really turning the agents into something that enterprises can trust. And that's like the key word for me, is that they can actually trust. Once you have like these hosted agents that, can get into like per session sandboxes, you can start them up, pretty much instantly. All the maturity processes that are going around this is what really excites me, and I think is what's going to excite everybody else. So I'm seeing this like talk that I do, the AgentOps talk, actually show up in each one of these tools. And the other part that I just love is that it's open, man. They're bringing in all the different ecosystems. What about the data side for you, Sunir?
Yeah. So again, what excites me is, at least from a data side, I can see 3 advancements. Like we already mentioned about HorizonDB. We are going to mention about Cosmos DB AI and get AI native, and then the Fabric aspect of it, right? So several advancements there. I can definitely see that this is all gonna work in a cohesive pattern, and data, every one of those traces and evals is queryable telemetry, right? From the back end of Cosmos or Postgres. So the agent fleet just become a data set now, right? So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, exactly. Guardrails that I think maybe this is a little bit of a sleeper from the conference. Like I said, it wasn't something that was featured really prominently, but this agent control specification, it's, best way for me to talk about it would be like an open standard that you can use, giving any runtime deterministic allow or deny type of decision at 5 different checkpoints that you might have inside the life cycle of an agent. So at input, at LLM call, maybe at state management, tool execution, and output, right? Being able to like have these, baked into it is giving you like a real structural enforcement to the agents. And so that helps with this like whole probabilistic versus deterministic like fight that we have on a day-to-day basis. This is, baked in, so it works across Foundry, your agent framework, even supported through LangChain. I've been talking about AgentOps as a formal like kind of discipline for now about 6 months, but I've been asked by customers, I've been talking about how do we make these agents enterprise worthy for a couple of years. And I think this is kind of like the seatbelt that's going to help us stay safe in our cars as we get on the highway. That for me is, one that was big. Agent 365, this went GA May 1st. We've got a registry. We've got access controls. We can do fleet dashboards. I can take a look at how much this agent's costing me per month. Every agent that you've got is now governed under an Entra identity. And I think, what some of you might have heard me say in some of my advisory sessions or on some of the other like talks that I've done is that like the lines between Copilot Studio and Foundry were starting to blur already. And now I'm starting to see this as like a unified platform. And it's not, when I was talking to the Foundry group about the control plane and merging or unifying the Copilot Studio and Foundry, it's not just the Microsoft ecosystem either. It's the Google and AWS and the other agent platforms that you can bring in there as well. This is such an important concept, and I still don't understand the licensing of it. Nobody's gonna I still don't quite figure what this is going, but this is going to help you manage shadow IT agents that are being built and deployed within your ecosystem, and it's going to make your security teams feel a lot better about what's going on. Before I move on, anything you want to say about this slide or the last two slides?
Yeah, like what a cross-platform agent registry means for data governance, right? So
we've got you've got permissions that are being set up, right? Between they have their setup permissions that, that you can control. And it works the same whether you're in Teams, whether you're in Fabric, it's going to respect those boundaries as well, right? And I think that's you've got a big story about the IQ, and I think that'll kind of piece it all together for the audience. And then, I think the other thing too is with the Microsoft Agent, framework hitting, general availability, you've got this orchestration layer that stays, where it's been deterministic. And all the participants, all the different models are still kind of plug and play, right? We don't have any dependencies on a specific, we're not vendor locked, I guess would be the best way for me to talk about this, is just say that we can mix and match a little bit as well. We've got plenty of slides to go through. Why don't we start to position a little bit more in the context becoming the infrastructure? We're talking about IQ here, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yep. So I mentioned before, right, that the agents don't have app shared traffic. They loop, store, retrieve, reason, act, learn. This is where I cache that in, right? Everything Microsoft rebuilt in the data tier traces back to that loop. So let's go ahead and start. All right.
Microsoft IQ,
right? It's a context layer. It does not replace Copilot and does not have a UI of its own, right? It stitches 4 sources. 1, WebIQ. There's a brand new AI native web grounding API, fresh, ranked from official legit sources, right? Second is Fabric IQ. And I've been talking about that in earlier demonstrations that we had as well, right? So you see structured business data as ontology, built by extending the Power BI semantic models and your other storage solutions within the Fabric that we call as lakehouse and warehouses, and has live telemetry data, right? And then the Work IQ. With M365 signals, your mail, calendars, Teams, SharePoint, organization graphs, just, again, permission aware, right? And then Foundry IQ, the knowledge retrieval layer for agents you build in Foundry, right? And it is GA as of June. And one thing I really liked was the demonstration by Microsoft, right? So Microsoft showed this live with a power utility, a bright line scenario, right? Where an operator needs to assess a live grid incident and write a response brief. And they did it with one agent, in fact, built in Microsoft Foundry, wired to a Foundry IQ knowledge, base that packages with the utilities documents, operational data, people into context, and then publish to Microsoft 365 for the whole team. So there were 3 questions that they asked. What are the current electricity prices in SFO? Right? An ungrounded model cannot answer that. The agent now reaches WebIQ, and searches the web and grounds that data with what is available with, the current mark, out there in the public internet, right? Second was like, which of our stations are at risk? So now it's not public information. It needs internal context. So it queries Fabric IQ. And then the entire bright lines grid is a Fabric ontology right now in graph model, right? So it retrieved that internal data. And third was, what are the steps to respond to a substation trip? So that policy and people activated work IQ and read the response playbook straight out of SharePoint, and that to the latest, right? The live document the team actually maintains. It's not a stale upload, right? So one situation, 3 questions, 1 connected answer. The outside world, your operations, and your people all stitched together. It ran as a long-running agent, so you can see every step along the way with Foundry routines to run on a schedule. So I don't think the model was the hard part. Reaching the right context at the right moment is. I mean, that seems to be the key here, right? It's not about picking the model, it's getting the data estate clean from a data standpoint, right? Governed and reachable, right? So it has to be clean, governed, and reachable, right? So that's a lot of IQs, but I hope that helps connect the dots.
I'm going to throw out here just a quick housekeeping item. You're going to see on some of these slides, we've been annotating them with what's in GA, what's in preview. Microsoft Build is a lot of times when they release things that are in private preview before anybody can actually touch them. But some of these things are actually, coming out like right there on the spot. I also echo you, Sunir. I saw this live and in person yesterday, talking with one of my customers where they were in their web browser and opened up the WebIQ, right? So they opened up Copilot in the web. They had CRM open and we're asking questions about, like that WebIQ would, ask. But it also was able to transition really quickly into like the work IQ and pull out like the CRM record that there was a list of a bunch of records and pulled these things out. It was so cool to see all these like context layers like really working together. Fantastic. And maybe the official branding Microsoft IQ would get rid of some of these other IQs. But fantastic. This is your slide, man. Make your case stronger.
HorizonDB, right? So Postgres just got an AI native sibling, right? So I'm sure some of you use Postgres already together. I mean, right now, right? So HorizonDB hit public preview at build. The specs Satya quoted on stage, built ground up for high availability, scale out, zone redundant with automated failover. 128 terabytes storage per cluster, 15 read replicas, and 3x throughput versus any self-managed PostgreSQL in there as per their internal testing, right? It also has got in-database model invocation through Azure AI extension, inference via SQL, no external orchestration layer, plus advanced vector indexing and semantic search. So it collapses the transactional database plus vector store plus search index, which we all use for RAG applications,
exactly.
retrieval augmented generation applications today. So it is Postgres compatible. So for our Azure DB for PostgreSQL clients, there is a familiar path, but it's preview and only in 5 regions at launch. I just want to call that out as well. Right now, it's in Australia East, Central US, Sweden Central, and West US 2 and 3. But more are coming. So pilot it before putting that in your roadmap. It's really promising though.
Yeah, I would say pilot it. A couple things that jumped out for me. One is I remember talking with the Postgres team last year. They had a booth and they had a managed service that was out there. And when we were talking to the HorizonDB team, I challenged them. I said, what's different about this, right? And so you're not going to have to go outside of the ecosystem and use a third-party managed system, which I think is really cool. They've got a unified like architecture that is distributed, in up to 15 different zones. So I think it's a really fantastic thing. One thing to note, especially around that pilot, is that when we asked them, like, what about the pricing of this, right? They do have pricing that's published, but they were really quick to acknowledge that they don't know what this is going to cost to run yet. So as you're piloting this, like, just expect over the next year that that pricing is probably going to fluctuate, quite a bit as you sort of figure out what this looks like. All right. So next topic, Godspeed.
All right, Godspeed. So Fabric Data Warehouse, right? Some of us are already in the path of Fabric because of its, concept of one leg, bringing everything in under one governance and security architecture, and the AI native capabilities, right? So those who are already in the path or contemplating that path, now Fabric's data warehouse can now publish eligible queries onto NVIDIA GPUs inside the execution engine. So there is no rewrites, no cluster sizing or resizing. The optimizer decides when the GPU is a better plan, right? So Satya said a 7x on stage in the keynote. The official Fabric blog is precise. It says up to 7x faster than the 3 leading cloud data warehouse vendors at 64 user concurrency. So that's the picture that I have on the right side, right? As per the internal benchmarking. I know it's very small, and because I had to work with the real estate that I had in the slide. So the first time, on the graph on the extreme left that you see is the 3-axis, like when on a single person concurrency. So when it switches from Fabric to NVIDIA GPUs, you're making your queries 3x faster. And if it is like 16 user concurrency, it's 6x faster. It is 64 user concurrency, it's 7x faster, right? So the research is the real credibility here, right? It grew out of the tensor query processor, productized as card speed, and won the best industry paper at Sigma 2026. The first fully managed warehouse to offer GPU acceleration, Fabric, right? So it's entering early access preview in July 2026. It's not GA today. So have that as a directional in your roadmap and pilot it, and when it is available, after you pilot, switch it on in production, once you know how it works. And why should we care about this, right? For people who are slightly distant from the constant reporting warehousing gimmicks, right? So heavy reporting or aggregation is exactly where warehouses get slow and expensive. So moving that to a GPU transparently changes the cost and performance math without rewriting any of your layers in the medallion architecture. Mostly the reports pull from a layer called gold, where you have curated/summarized data, right, meant for your reports. But, you do not have to redo any of that. I'd still get independent benchmarks before quoting the speedups. So that's my personal take on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, looking at this graph, what really jumps out to me is that, without the GPU accelerated query performance, you have exponential growth as you start to grow these, the concurrent users. But it looks like a real linear growth pattern with the GPU, which to me, sky's the limit then, right?
Exactly.
So might actually save you some serious money when we start talking about, the difference between an F64 and an F128, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's some big things. I was not as impressed with Rayfin, and man, you really leaned into this pretty hard. I remember sitting in a couple of sessions with you.
Yeah. So one thing that really excites me about Rayfin is now we have been perceiving Fabric as your one-stop shop in the future for your data, right? And we have been perceiving it as your data platform, right? That's the concept that Microsoft had 3 years ago when they actually introduced Fabric. You do not have to spin up different services like your Azure Data Factories or your storage solutions like your Blob or your relational databases and whatnot. You have Fabric as your ecosystem. Now they are extending beyond that. For the record, Rayfin is an SDK, an open source SDK living on GitHub as Microsoft/Rayfin. is the engine underneath Fabric's new app building experience, not a code button. So Fabric is now going from a data platform concept to even an app building concept, right? So you have one command, npx ref app, and that provisions a complete enterprise app backend on Fabric, a SQL database, Microsoft Entra ID authentication, a GraphQL API, a one-lake connected static hosting, and such, right? You can literally start from a template. It could be a blank template, or right now the templates that they have is like one is a blank template. They have a to-do list app template, then they have a data app template. So that the data app template, for example, wires straight into your semantic models. So it ships the scaffolding and agents.markdown guide, MCP servers, refin.yaml config, sample code, etc. So the unlock from a BI, folks, you can actually turn a Fabric semantic model into a working app or an agent without hand building the API or plumbing. And because the app runs on Fabric, its data lands in one lake, and it is immediately available in Power BI, notebooks, and data agents. There's also Replit partnership, by the way. So the developers can build in a familiar AI-first environment and deploy it into a governed Fabric tenant. Again, from an architectural standpoint, it's new, pilot it, before planning it in your production. Two questions I would ask is, how much is the flexibility do you lose? How much of a flexibility do you lose off when you go by the templates happy path, right? And how stable is an SDK, which is very new. So,
well, you and I closed out build at a little workshop, little roundtable session talking about Rayfin. And the thing that jumped out to me was that the governance wasn't quite there. And I could see this turning into like the access databases of the future,
Exactly.
And that to me is, I want to see that problem solved before I'm going to give it my endorsement. But it's definitely something cool. What about Power BI? This was
Power BI. Yeah, this was really cool, right? So 2 Power BI announcements that compress the path from raw data to a polished report. Both are in preview, by the way. Agent skills for Power BI, which is a screenshot that I have. So if you can read on the black screen over there, right? It's like you can describe the report that you want in plain language and hand it a screenshot. Well, that's creating a semantic model, by the way. The screenshot that I have is creating a semantic model. But, you can literally describe the report that you want in a plain language, provide it a screenshot, and an AI agent builds the end-to-end solution, right? A semantic model from your Fabric data, report pages, visuals, with design best practices. So it works on existing reports as well. So cleaning up a scrappy report is no longer a rebuild. It builds on the Power BI modeling MCP that shipped last November. So Fabric apps on semantic models. So AI agents build and deploy Fabric native web apps directly on your semantic models, right? So Fabric has the backend powered by open source Rayfin SDK from the previous slide, which we spoke about, right? So my read is Fabric is, this build announcement on Fabric was like really huge with these two, right? Plus I would add NVIDIA GPU capabilities as well, right? So the governance angle is what makes sense, more than a demo standpoint, right? So for years, let business users build apps meant shadow data and ungoverned logic, right? So building on semantic model means the metrics and the security travel with the app, right? So the catch is that both are preview, and an agent builds your model is only as good as your data state underneath it. So it's really important that you keep your data accurate, precise, right? So garbage in still gets your polished report out of garbage, which loops right back to the Microsoft IQ's standpoint, that I had about clean and governed estate.
Yeah, so exactly. All right, what's Cosmos DB? You brought this up earlier. What's good? What's bad? What'd you hear?
Yeah, so let me make the AI native concrete with 2 toolkits Microsoft shipped to preview at build, right? Both built on Cosmos DB for NoSQL as a single store for documents, vectors, and full text. With vector, full text, and hybrid search are built in, right? So there is no need of a second vector database, no sync code needed. First is like the agent memory toolkit, a Python SDK that gives an agent a real memory. It stores raw conversation, and it turns into derived memories. It summarizes extracted facts and cross-thread user profiles so the agent holds a coherent thread now and recalls a stable user context weeks later, right? So the part I like is that it can process that memory automatically in the background using Cosmos, change speed, and durable functions. So new turns get summarized and facts extracted without you having to orchestrate it. And it even reconciles contradictory facts with an audit trail. That was like really awesome to see, right?
Yeah.
So, and memory is usually the things teams bolt on with a vector store plus a document store plus a custom logic. So here you have one toolkit on the database you already run, right? And the second was agent retrieval toolkit, a reference architecture for multi-step RAG. One-shot RAG retrieves ones and answers ones. This one retrieves, drafts a preliminary answer, spots the gap, generates follow-ups of questions, retrieves more evidence, and synthesizes a grounded final answer with vector plus full text search. So that was cool to see, like, Cosmos DB, having these two new toolkits added, right? So yeah, that's pretty much my take on that.
All right. We talked a little bit about this already, right? Describing the report, the agent goes out and build it.
Yep.
Anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I think in my preparation, I had two versions of it. So pretty much like it's the beauty of your natural language development of your report, right? Like it creates a semantic model and even the visualization, which is like really cool. You don't have to spend a lot of time on building your semantic layers and dashboards. So that's what my column, which we already saw.
So now this is in preview. Have you been able to play with this in Fabric yet? Or is it?
No,
you got to turn it. It's not rolled out in our tenant, right?
I don't think it's rolled out in our tenant, so I'm really looking forward to trying that, in the coming days, actually.
Yeah. What about optimization? I know that there were a lot of improvements about how less experienced people can become kind of optimization experts, right?
Yeah.
What were you seeing in terms of Microsoft Research and the R&D tools? That I know we've seen the R&D, the researching tools, kind of over the last couple of builds, but I think this was under described, under talked about, kind of like a bonus, found it on the floor kind of thing. Thoughts?
Yeah, OptiGuide, right? That was a floor find, right, out of Microsoft Research. So it brings supply chain and scheduling optimization to people who are not operations research PhDs. So schedule the line, minimize overtime, hit the ship date, and it translates that into a constrained optimization run. If you run a plan, the preview signup is open and the bar to enter is low, actually. So the whole thing is go sign up, right? So
yeah, I like this. There were some really cool demos in the researcher lab that I was able to find specifically around this. And I don't know if some of the people that were there with me, some of our customers from Build were watching this as well. It was pretty cool. We got some other topics here to just kind of quickly through, right? Some scorecards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this has a scorecard for the data tier. Build on what is GA, so Fabric mirroring and Medallion, Cosmos GA features, Microsoft IQ, and Work IQ APIs is GA, this week. Always pilot, don't roadmap. HorizonDB is in preview. Card Speed in early access in July. Power BI agent skills in preview. The operating rule context is the new bottleneck. And the data estate is a moat, I would say, right? A proof of concept is a concept car. Don't drive it on the highway, right? So, Brian, the agents looks like they grew up, right?
That is very true. So kind of walking into the next theme, agents, they did get this, they got this identity and importantly, they got initiatives too, right? Like autopilot is something that I thought was really interesting. I had to scratch my head a little bit when he brought it up. One mental model for, all this branding sprawl that's happening, the three different planes. Plane one, we've got IQs. That's the context of what the agent knows. Plane two is the copilots. That's the interaction the human, asks. the AI answers, the episodic, and reactive type of thing. And then plane 3, we've got, this new one, the autopilots, finally a copilot that's granted an identity. It's got persistence. It can take initiative, right? They talked about Scout as like the first autopilot, and that's going to run under its own identity, right? Not a shared service account, but its own identity. That's the kind of like model that we need that's going to get past the security team when you review it. So I think it's really cool. I think we're going to see some more about it. And I do want to talk a little bit about Scout. I thought it was really, really interesting. Scout, for those of you that didn't see the keynote, it acts in the background. It has the ability to read your inbox and draft any kind of replies for you, organize your files, maybe do some meeting prep if that's what you need. And it works all the way across the IQ system, right? So Teams and Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint. But the most important thing is that when it does take actions, and that's the point of this, is take actions, they're all going to be attributable to the audit trail that runs under your Entra ID as well as the Scout, Entra ID. There was a little bit of leak memo controversy happening around this. I'm not exactly sure. I want to dive into it a little bit. But what I'm saying is let's see how the preview terms and how the telemetry disclosures kind of evolve before you put this in front of your workforce. I haven't been able to turn it on in the concurrency tenant. I'm not sure that I really want to. When you go through the setup instructions, it requires you to turn OpenClaw on for the organization in order to get this work. And I'm not sure that a lot of organizations are going to be quite there. But this is definitely frontier preview. Be careful. Make sure that you're rolling this out in a safe and monitored way. My posture really for this in the next 90 days is to watch it, but don't buy. I'm going to buy it in my own personal tenant just to play around, but I'll let you know how that goes. Which I think kind of leads us a little bit into the trust perimeter, right? The fourth deep dive. This is where things are starting to reach into you personally, into the laptop. I think Nadella's line was Windows is the best place to run agents, but the strategy now isn't all cloud or all local. It's something in the routing in between, right? We have to look at the routine. We have to look at sensitivity. We have to look at latency bound work and how that stays local, taking into account the token economy that's, starting to get a lot of traction right now. So we're looking for ways to get near zero token cost, but still keep that heavy reasoning. And that's probably going to stay in the cloud because that's where those compute resources are going to need. Nobody's going to be walking around with a dolly, in order to carry this, huge stacks of GPUs to process it. Kind of some segue a little bit into this OpenClaw, story. I thought that was really cool. And it brings together both the OpenClaw on Windows, which I have not had a chance to play with yet, but also this idea of the Microsoft execution containers. So they work kind of hand in hand. And I see the value of the Microsoft execution containers, but giving it making it real with people with OpenClaw, I think is the two pieces that brought that together. So what I'm trying to show here is the whole hybrid thesis in one, single frame. OpenClaw as an open source runtime, it's got some dangers running on your Windows machine, maybe running an Anthropic model with, OS enforced containment. That's the permissions, that we need to take this stuff to the next level. And being able to do some of this in a local inference is super important as well. And the Microsoft execution containers, they're going to help enforce that boundary. And they're going to do that at the OS level, right? So you kind of only have to describe this execution container once, and Windows going to hold that boundary for everywhere that this agent's going to run. Bring in Defender, Entra, Intune, Purview, all this stuff extends to these local agents as well. So you're going to get that layer of governance and security across the organization. I would say this idea of building local agents was kind of a blind spot. People were going to be able to do these open claudes, things like that. And I think that blind spot just got kind of closed up a little bit. What about from the data side? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, from the data side, local inference means unmetered tokens, right? So an Aeon one plan ships 14 billion parameter reasoning inbox, tool calling, and the data never leaves the device, right? So
Yeah.
that's the upside.
Yeah, that AI on model is something that I am looking forward to playing with in quite a bit. 14 billion parameters, it's enough to run on my workstation, even without the RTX Spark. So, might be able to see some good results out of that. Project Solera, I had a really nice like close up of that guy's badge when he was standing up on the stage. And, I'd say like, here's just, somewhat of a respectful disagreement. Microsoft, they did ask the right question, like, what's the next form factor for an agent first world? Honestly, I don't think it's going to be like, a laptop in the future. But their answer was, a wearable badge, right? And they had some other reference designs up that I took some pictures when we were walking around the booth. I just don't see it, man. I don't see these devices like, I saw that badge up on the stage and, took that picture of it. And I thought to myself, I have something very similar to that. It's called a smartphone. It looks about the same size, the same weight. What am I getting out of this? Right. So I just wasn't a big fan. We're going to see where this goes. But I do think that we need to start thinking about where we meet these agents, where we interact with them. And I don't think it's going to be on a laptop or necessarily my phone. I don't always think it's going to be a Meta glasses or an AI lapel that somebody wears. So it's great to hear people talking about these ideas, but let's find something that actually works, right?
Absolutely. Looking forward to that, however that evolves.
Yeah. And that talks down, I kind of led into this last little part here, which was the Surface RTX. I mean, this is a huge story for me in a lot of ways, but it's not a thing yet, right? We're going to wait to see it. I took some pictures. Those are the actual pictures from the floor. Couldn't touch them. They were under these like super secure, like glass boxes. Actually, the battery ran out on the laptop and they had to lift the box. And I was like, can I hold it? And she was like, no. Armed guards started walking closer to me when I got closer, but they're real devices. And I was talking about this at a meetup last night. If you think about it, they're promising this is going to be available in the fall. So I would expect that you're going to see these devices that these are actually working prototypes of the real thing, so I'm not actually surprised about it. What struck me the most is that the dev box on the left side, it was so thin. I mean, it really wasn't that big of a box.
Yeah, I saw that too.
It's the power that it has, right? A petaflop on your desk, in your backpack, walking around, local AI compute. It's got 128 gigs of unified memory. That's going to compete with the MacBook, with the Mac minis, and you're going to be able to do some damage with it. Is it big enough to run 120 billion parameter model right now? I don't know. We're going to see that. That's akin to, I mean, even the Sparks that are out there now, Lance, with your Sparky, if you're listening, you even said last night, it struggles with some of that, like, really, really large model consumption. But so it's not shipping till later this year. It's not real in my mind, but it is exciting to see this on a Windows device, because to get this kind of performance, you almost had to go to Apple. And that's just not something that I like to do myself. I know a lot of other people do. That's kind of my take on that. What did you think of the RTX?
Really promising. I am, I'm planning to get one, once they have it.
Oh yeah, I'm getting one. Absolutely. I've put myself in, actually I use like 3 different email addresses just to make sure I got in. We'll see how they ration that out. A couple things. We're pretty much at time here. So 2 things that I kind of put on the back burner specifically that I was hoping we could get a little bit of time to talk about. We got like 2 minutes before we got to shut her down. Did you take a look at the formulator?
Yeah, I think, the Microsoft research, open source, agent-driven data that connects to OneLake, Custo, and Postgres. So it's all on GitHub today. So I would highly encourage, go play with it.
Yeah, I was walking through a demo around this, and it's a really, really cool way to be able to spin this stuff up, really, get the orchestration, the ETL orchestration all pulled together, and then start to like ask questions about your data.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. They've got a good Git repo. I followed the Microsoft research group, on GitHub and what they're doing. I'm going to start following them a lot more because there were some other things in that lab that were just, blowing my mind what those guys are working on. It's really fantastic. And shout out to that group too, because I was talking about my 10-year-old son and lemonade stands and what he wants to invest in. And, they gave me a lot of really good pointers and then gave me some 3D stuff to take home to the kids. So shout out to you guys. You were awesome. Trellis 2 was also in this research lab. And it was, image to 3D, kind of rendering and building out like 3D models that you could actually use. It was super fun. Did you do anything with it, Sunir?
No, I think that's a part I missed. So
yeah. So it was so two aspects that was kind of cool. And that's too bad that you missed it, because one is like this trellis aspect of it. So what I was able to do was use the new Microsoft AI models to prompt and get images generated, like 2D images, and then use Trellis to actually map it into a 3D model, right? And then it could print the 3D model. So what we did was I made this like fish. Everybody knows I like outdoor stuff, so of course it was a fish. But I made this fish, and the model, like the image turned out great. And then the model actually turned out really nice and smooth. And they're like, we're going to go ahead and print this, because most of these models that people are trying to build, like, through Trellis, they get kind of sketched a little bit. So I got this postcard that I went and sent the next morning to my house, and then got them to print out that fish on the 3D printer that I could take home. Super fun, super cool. And that's also open source. You can go and find that on GitHub as well. So that being said, we are at 11:59. There was a page, you put a link in the chat. If you want to go in a little bit deeper on any of these things that we talked about today, fill out that survey. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what we should have covered, what we shouldn't have covered. And maybe if we get enough people that are interested, we'll do a part 2 of this. So with that being said, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.